IELTS Listening Practice Test. Published by pteielts.com, 2021. This recording is a free learning resource. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1. Part 1. You will hear a part of a podcast where the host is talking with a scientist about an organism called tardigrade, or water bears. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Dr. Thomas Boothby, thanks for coming on Houston. We have a podcast today.
Absolutely. My pleasure to be here.
Hey, this mission that's going to be carrying your experiment to the International Space Station is right around the corner, about to launch. How are you feeling in anticipation of this launch coming up?
Me personally, I'm extremely excited. We've been working on this since 2015, so a lot of hard work and time has gone into this, and really exciting that the launch is right around the corner.
Well, let's get right into it, Thomas. We're going to be talking about water bears today, and I got to say, I am a huge fan. I discovered them I think it was it was a couple years ago. Animal Planet did this show called The Most Extreme. And they did one on the most extreme survivors, and that's where they just went deep into the survivability of a water bear. And I was absolutely fascinated. I could not believe what these things were capable of surviving in. So let's just start there, understanding water bears, tardigrades, because that will sort of help us transition into this specific science investigation that's going to space station. So let's start with Tardigrades 101, Thomas. Take us through what these things are.
Well, so tardigrades, or water bears as they're sometimes commonly referred to as, are a group of microscopic animals that are capable of surviving some of the harshest conditions that we know of. So despite being these teeny tiny little microscopic organisms that you need a microscope to see, they're extremely robust. So they can survive a number of extremes that we typically think of as being restrictive to life. So some examples of sort of extreme environments or conditions that tardigrades can survive include being dried out to the point where they essentially have no water left inside their body or cells. They can be frozen down to just above absolute zero. They can be heated up, in some cases past the boiling point of water. They can survive thousands of times as much radiation as you or I could. They can go days or weeks with little or no oxygen, and maybe the sort of most remarkable feat that they've been shown to perform is that they can actually survive in the vacuum of outer space. They're the only animal that we know of that can do this. So they're really quite amazing and unique.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
So if you were to have a picture of a tardigrade, how would you describe sort of what they look like?
Yeah, so what I tell people is think about the little like gummy bear candy and imagine that, but with 8 legs instead of 4. They look like these kind of chubby little 8-legged gummy bears. Yeah, I think they're pretty adorable. If people have seen pictures of them, they're pretty charismatic. But that's usually how I describe them.
Yeah, and they're I mean, the pictures I've seen of them, they kind of look clear, right?
Yeah, so depending on what kind of microscope you're using to look at them, if you're using like a light microscope, many tardigrades are transparent, so you can see through them. Others aren't. So different species of tardigrades actually, like morphologically, like how they look is pretty distinct. You have some that, yeah, as you said, are just kind of clear. You have others that almost look like they have like armored plates on their backs. They look like little tanks, and those are a little bit harder to see through. But yeah, there's actually quite a bit of sort of morphological diversity within the group of animals.
So in the beginning of this chat, you talked about all of these different very extreme conditions that the water bears can survive in. So if I were to go hiking around planet Earth, where could I find them?
So tardigrades have actually been found almost anywhere and everywhere that folks have looked for them. They've been found, on the tops of mountains, like in the Himalayas, in the deep ocean, in mud volcanoes, tropical rainforests, in Antarctica. But amazingly, if you just go in your backyard, they're probably living back there.
Oh wow! I didn't realize they were so widespread.
Absolutely.
So
That is the end of part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to part 1. Now turn to part 2. Part 2. You will hear a man called Jordan Peterson talking about his struggles while suffering from health issues. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Hi, everyone. As some of you may know, but others will not, it's been a long while since I put up any new content on this YouTube channel. I've been suffering from impaired health, severely impaired health, as a consequence of benzodiazepine use for anxiety, or more accurately, from a combination of using that medication and then ceasing its use once I realized it was dangerous. that's put me in and out of hospitals for much of the last year in Connecticut, in the United States, in Toronto, in Canada, in Moscow, in Russia, and in Belgrade, Serbia, as my family searched for specialists who could aid me in the severe post-use withdrawal and neurological damage-related consequences of both the benzodiazepine use and its cessation. I started taking it in 2016, 2017, early 2017, according to the prescribed recommendations, and really never give it a second thought. That was a mistake, to say the least. Anyways, I've learned some things during that trying time, I suppose, or at least I can tell you what kept me going during what was certainly the worst period of my life. Family, that's for sure. Friends, and the work I was able to continue doing as I was able to continue writing, something that I'll talk about probably within the next month. My family, my wife Tammy, my son Julian and his wife Jillian, and my daughter Michaela and her husband Andre, have been of inestimable value to me and provided me with tremendous support during this period. Michaela and Andre accompanied me to Russia and to Serbia. Both of those episodes were extremely grueling and lasted for months. But I'm alive, and I have plans for the future. I want to thank those people from the bottom of my heart, my extended family and friends, whom I will name elsewhere, went above and beyond the call of duty. In my estimation, I certainly not convinced that I would have the character to provide to any one of them what they provided to me. So that was a humbling lesson, I suppose.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
My work, this sort of work, although it was all writing and not video production, was also extremely useful because I could sustain myself by producing and then culling through thoughts that were helpful despite my anguish, I suppose, and my lack of hope for the future. Hopefully, we'll see, but hopefully much of that is behind me and I can return to something resembling a normal life. I can tell you what my plans are for video production, at least for the next while. I completed a biblical series devoted to Genesis in fall of 2017, and that has proved very popular. It's a strange word to use for a lecture series like that. I'm going to start working on the next book in the Old Testament, which is Exodus, but that will take a while. But in the interim, I think I'm going to produce videos devoted to Proverbs, the book of wisdom, essentially, or a book of wisdom. You've all heard, no doubt, that wisdom is proverbial, or that there's such a thing as proverbial wisdom, and that phrase stems from the book of Proverbs, which are single sentence aphorisms imparting some truth. I think the analysis of those, which can be done in a relatively short period of time, will prove of benefit to me and perhaps to those who are inclined to watch or listen to my analysis. I would also like to thank all of you for continuing to support my work. I have far more followers on YouTube and Instagram and Twitter, for that matter, than I did before I became ill. And my book has sold very well in multiple languages, and that's really amazing and remarkable. And I hope that what I produce in the future that people will find it of equal or greater utility. That's an ambitious hope, given how much attention what I've produced before has garnered, but it still seems appropriate, an appropriate goal for my upcoming activities.
That is the end of part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to part 2. Now turn to part 3. Part 3. You will hear a podcast host, Gary, talking to 2 women, Alicia and Crystal, about their jobs as increment training integrators. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Alicia and Crystal, thanks so much for coming on Houston We Have a Podcast today.
Thanks so much for having us, Gary. This is really exciting. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
I agree. We are excited to be here.
I'm looking forward to talking with each of you. I was just talking to some of my colleagues ahead of this podcast, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be talking to the increment training integrators, and they said, oh, great. And they said, ask them a bunch of questions, because I know they do a lot, but I don't know if we understand the full scope of what you do. It's actually quite incredible, and I can't wait to get into it. I want to start, though, with understanding about what it takes to be an integrator. What I think the ultimate project manager for a person's life, right? That's what I'm thinking, but I want to understand a little bit about what it takes to have this role. Alicia, we'll start with you.
Okay, great. So you are correct. It is the ultimate project manager for someone's life, and we take it very seriously because we do encompass not only their training, but it does affect their personal life as well. So we have to look at all facets of a crew member. So I actually have a degree in criminology, which I'm sure you're going to want to ask how that equates, but really it's my negotiation skills that I learned through having a degree in criminology that helps me in my job, because it's all about negotiations. Time, countries, it's all about negotiation. So you have to be able to negotiate and plan ahead, long-term planning, and then when someone comes in and changes the plan, changes the crew members, you just have to be ready to fly with it. So you have to maintain flexibility.
That is perfect. Crystal, what about you? What kind of background do you come from?
I have a degree in aerospace engineering. I started here at Johnson Space Center right after I graduated working on shuttle flights in the FAO group. And so I actually started with the experience of planning for the crew, but planning for the mission duration once they're on board. I've been here for almost 14 years, and just a few years ago, I transferred to the crew office where I started planning for the crew prior to launch. So definitely consideration of all different types of milestones and requirements that we put together in order to make a mission successful before and after. I'd say a lot of experience also comes from being a mom, being able to multitask and manage every day and understand what people need personally and professionally in order to get things accomplished really helps us out in our job.
Very, very important.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Important. Now we're getting some hints of what you all do. We talked about a project manager for someone's life. Alicia, you talked about negotiations. Both of you talked about planning, and then you also talked about missions. So, Crystal, I'm gonna go back to you to help me understand just what is the role of an increment training integrator.
So our job is basically to have an astronaut ready to launch. Means they have to be completely trained, certified, ready to go. We start that 1 to 2 years prior to their launch date once they get assigned. And we are responsible for building and scheduling their whole training program. That includes international trips, requirements. We schedule classes, evaluations, simulations, language training, everything you can think of, medical preparations, anything that the crew is going to have to do. We gather all these inputs from all the different locations, and then the first thing we do is we meet with our international counterparts to develop a template, which is basically like a weekly calendar. So we know how many weeks the crew members are going to need to train here and in other countries. And then from there, we start refining those details. So whenever the astronauts are training here in the U.S., we start putting together a plan daily of all of their activities that they're going to have to complete. It is something that is an integration.
That is the end of part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to part 3. Now turn to part 4. Part 4. You will hear a professor giving a lecture about the differences between fixed and adjustable reactions in human bodies. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
We've seen that the body is a mosaic of vulnerable tissues and organs that are more resistant to damage. That is, in fact, associated with the degree to which reactions are fixed or adjustable. Some developmental and physiological processes are very sensitive, for example, glucose metabolism and blood pressure. Others are insensitive, DNA replication, purine metabolism. The sensitive reactions usually evolve to be adjustable to changes in the environment, and the insensitive reactions evolve to be fixed, or both things went along together. It's really sort of a chicken and the egg problem. The adjustable reactions are buying flexibility at the cost of vulnerability, so insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes are pathologies that result in an adjustable reaction. The insensitive reactions are robust to being dysregulated, but they remain vulnerable to genetic defect. When something goes wrong with an insensitive reaction, a fixed situation, it is normally a catastrophe. So let's unpack those a bit. The characteristics of this contrast are that the fixed reactions, of course, are invariant. The adjustable are regulated by environment. Fixed reactions are insensitive to environment, and they operate the same way in any natural environment, whereas the adjustable reactions are sensitive and their function depends on the particular environmental state. Interestingly, the fixed reactions are often highly conserved right across the tree of life. Intermediate metabolism in bacteria and humans is actually fairly similar. Adjustable reactions vary within and between species. They are constantly being shaped by natural selection, and they are responsible for adaptation to different environments. The fixed reactions are controlling core biological processes, and the adjustable reactions are controlling physiological adaptation. They're responsible for phenotypic variation and for reaction norms. The fixed reactions can be disrupted in a catastrophic way by a single gene mutation. They are responsible for things like cystic fibrosis, progeria, that is unnaturally rapid aging, for SCID, which is severe combined immune deficiency, and for many other innate diseases. Adjustable reactions are often, in contrast, regulated not by one, but by many genes. Those genes are often polymorphic, and the alleles for those genes are often changing in frequency under selection. They cause predispositions to diseases that are caused by environmental factors, and those predispositions are then elicited when there is an environmental mismatch. Then we get obesity, type 2 diabetes, asthma, hypertension, atherosclerosis, things like that. So some comments on fixed processes. Some of the core processes that are fixed are DNA replication, or something like transcription of actin to make cytoskeleton. At the larger level, the level of big modules in the body, major features in the body plan are fixed. Number of heads, usually 1, legs, usually 2, 2 arms, 5 digits, and 2 eyes. Those features are normally fixed. If there's a mutation that disrupts such a trait, there can be a really catastrophic effect. Now, normally, the quality control mechanisms in the mammalian reproductive tract are going to catch mutations of large effect like that. They'll be caught either in the gametic zygotic or at the stage of the conceptus. So there might be an early spontaneous abortion that just takes that out in the first menses, and actually the woman never notices that that happened. But when they're not caught, there can be major birth defects. So brace yourself. These pictures are not pretty. Here are some major...
That is the end of part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to part 4. That is the end of the listening test. In the IELTS test, you would now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet.